I think creativity is simply an approach
Yeah.
to something, and that to a degree, a level of lack is almost a gift because it creates opportunity, and creativity loves a brief. How often have we felt bored? You've got a day off, and suddenly you just don't know what to do with yourself, and you find yourself doom scrolling on your phone and wasting time. And it's because you're not being creative. And other times you might find that you're under pressure, but you suddenly get a great idea and you are inspired to do something. And I think that's the difference between having a brief and not having a brief. And
Hi, Hanneke. How are you?
oh, well, thank you. Fewer technical issues than last time.
Well, it looks like you're in light now.
Yes. We're very grateful for that. It's cold, but there's light, so there's hope.
Oh, okay, yeah. But it's wonderful to talk to you. And but just tell me, where are you now? Where are you based at the moment?
I'm based in Philippolis, which is very much the center of everything and nothing in the middle of South Africa. We're about 75 kilometers from Colesberg. That very much sets us kind of on the border of the Free State and the Northern Cape, not too far from the Orange River.
So that's in the Karoo, the South African Karoo.
Technically 10 kilometers north of the strictly speaking Karoo, I guess. We're just across the Orange River in the Free State, so it's called the False Karoo. We share a lot of the same climatic, climate and in terms of plants and nature and seasonality. All of that's really the same, but I guess the border just was sort of 10 minutes drive from here would be the strict barrier, but as they call us, the False Karoo. Slightly, just ever so slightly softer, and a little bit more of the last bits of savanna before you get to the real dry, arid parts of the Northern Cape.
Well, you described it very well. I mean, it sounds amazing where you are, but I know you come from Johannesburg. You originally worked in Johannesburg, and you were in advertising.
Yes, so and to a degree, I still am. It was quite incidental that we did end up here. My aunt actually introduced us to the little town. She lived in the UK for about 30 years and decided that she wanted a little foothold back in South Africa for the middle of winter. And her and my mom got in a car and took a road trip and decided and visited loads of little towns and decided on Philippolis. It's absolutely tiny, but it's quaint. It's really rich with history, and it still has a very lively permanent community here. In the town, apart from the predominantly sheep and wool farmers in the area. But so they settled here, and so my husband and I bought two little guest houses here. And we thought that's a plan for one day when we retire, we'll slowly redo them. And one day when we've retired, we'll move out of the big city. And then lockdown happened, and we came down here on a whim, and we decided we'll come do lockdown here. And that was over 2 years ago. We just never left.
Really?
So we never went back to Joburg.
Yeah, but it's quite a big transition. I mean, it's from Joburg to there. It's not your average South African countryside there.
No, as people do, the farmers here like to say it's tough on the people, but kind on the animals, which means it really is the climate is harsh. It's not too dissimilar from the Karoo. And to a degree, and I'm veering off the topic slightly, but what did absolutely make my soul sing when we arrived here was the wide open spaces. Someone has called this a cosmic landscape. It's wild open savanna with hillside and koppies, kind of spread out quite wide, and there was just something my soul could breathe, and it was a big wide open canvas. But at the same time, it being a harsh, cold in winter, hot in summer, sometimes windy, I don't think we will have a massive influx of people anytime soon. I don't see developments on the hills outside town
Okay.
anytime soon.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there's something about the openness and the isolation which I found incredibly invigorating. And then also the contrast, because as much as it's isolated so much, there's an incredibly lively community life. So you're far more aware of your neighbors and what's happening in each other's lives on the flip side of that.
Yeah, that's interesting that you say that, because it's these small communities, the people are very much focused on each other as well. But I find also that they are much more creative. And this is why I wanted to talk to you about it, because I think advertising is a very creative industry. And you made this transition. And I want to now ask you how this influenced your work from being in the city and all the exposure to different sensory elements, and then going to the countryside and where it's more quiet and a different stimulation almost.
Yes, yeah, that's it's been an amazing experience. So it has a bit of history. I was lucky. I think my folks, my parents were both kind of in academic fields, and art and kind of an artistic element was always part of us, of my youth growing up, which we were incredibly fortunate. But approaching, and I went to art school in high school and studied design. But so I didn't really know much outside of a realm, I guess, of approaching life through working in a creative field. And I went to study advertising or design because that's the only way I knew of kind of making a living from a creative perspective. And to us, I mean, I was a teenager and studied in the late 90s. I think that was still towards the end of the heyday of advertising. That's kind of on the back of a strong economy and advertising there was still a lot of money being funneled that way. And we had, as youngsters, we very much had the idea that creativity lived there. If you wanted creativity, you go into an agency. That's where people get amazing ideas, do incredible things that blow people's minds, and it's all, that's where it happens. And I think over the years that I've worked through publishing, branding, and advertising. I've been a bit of an all-rounder. I did come to the realization that creativity doesn't only live in one place. Creativity doesn't have a home. And I do think, sadly, sometimes for creatives going into more of a commercial application of creative work might find it disillusioning because a lot of it is business. A lot of it is commerce and is selling and is marketing, and you have to have your business hat on. And not that those things are mutually exclusive. At the same time, I do think there's tremendous creativity that lives in doing charity work or financial work. So that was a shift that a conclusion I came to later in my life. And I think moving to Philippolis, moving to a small town, I found that there are many more ways to live and approach life in a creative way when you are in a space where there's, I don't want to call it a space of deprivation, but definitely a lifestyle of minimalism. Yeah. A lifestyle where there's less and where invention is something that you have to rely on more often.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think this is exactly what you're saying, that if in this minimalistic environment, you think differently because you have to make use of the resources you have, yeah. And I think this is part of creativity, is this problem solving thing. I think we think of creativity as, somebody painting a picture, but creativity is actually problem solving.
100%, yes. And the beauty, I mean, there's kind of a trend towards minimalism in an approach to, Marie Kondo started that in terms of how we decorate or how we live inside our houses. There are, trends in terms of the minimalists talking about approaching life from a more clean-cut perspective. And, just like a diet, sometimes if it's forced from the outside, it's a little bit more difficult to adhere to. But somehow if you find yourself in a context where that's just what you have, it's almost easier to adhere to it. For instance, I had a veggie patch in my garden in Joburg, and that was always something long forgotten. Like, it would be easily forgotten and nothing much ever came from it. But why would you bother with a veggie patch if you pass several really brilliant grocery stores on your way home from the office? And frankly, you're in a hurry. And frankly, the point is to get to the final result, which is the meal. There isn't, it's not about the process. It's not really about anything else. It's quite functional. Whereas we have the dubious luxury of only having 2 tiny corner shops in town. So I cannot buy celery in town. There are basics that I actually cannot get. I cannot get certain days fresh produce isn't necessarily available, and I've started getting that got me to not only plant a veggie patch, but we planted a vineyard. And our time that we've been here, we stopped making wine in a few years. But there's a driver to do things for yourself. There's a driver to make mozzarella because there's wonderful fresh organic milk from someone outside of town, but there's no good cheese. There is no good bread. You don't have the veggies down the road. So it starts giving you a reason to do things and to get you closer to the source of your food and the source of your sustenance, which was a wonderful antithesis to the very highly strung, fast mental pace of the world that I used to work in and still do work in marketing. I found a phenomenal balance there. I found stepping up my back garden on phone call with a meeting in the middle of summer and picking fresh warm figs from the tree in the back garden and having them while they were these beautiful moments where 2 worlds meet and somehow they support and I think contribute to each other rather than being I guess, you start bringing of those poles closer together.
But now you're talking about the stress also, there's this environment in Johannesburg or in the city where you are under stress. And do you find that you also in your job now think differently, that you get to better conclusions or better solutions because you're not under stress?
So I won't say the stress is gone entirely. I mean, there are maybe it's balanced better, but there was a pivotal moment, and that was before it had even occurred to me that we might accidentally land in the countryside. There was in advertising, the focus has been more and more over the past few years, not just on putting your product out there, but in affecting what we call behavioral change. So you want to create a message, to streamline the message, to have a consumer do something. So you have in the constructs that we work with, you end up having at the end of your piece of communication, you have a call to action. So tell someone to do something. And feel, it's kind of having these things in the back of your mind and having gone through a period that was quite stressful. My father also passed away. In that period, the last few years we were in Joburg, so it was all a little bit heavy. But I found myself standing in a queue at a grocery store after work on my way home, and they were these recyclable grocery bags, and they were all emblazoned with slogans, and they were all relatively innocent, but it was kind of seize the day and know your rights and grab your potential. And somehow I was just thinking, stop talking to me, like stop telling me what to do. I had this experience of total overstimulation, and I think that's something that I wanted. It was wonderful to have a break from that for a minute, because I think as consumers, we truly are bombarded on so many platforms. So apologies to everyone on the end of what we do as an industry. I mean, there's also good to it. I do think city life can leave us a little worse for wear, and the psychological strains that we've been carrying over the past couple of years with COVID and so many other elements that have impacted on our day-to-day, we do take a level of mental strain. And our external environment does play into that. So being in the countryside has definitely been a release from that to a large degree. I actually woke up at 1:30 this morning to the sound of a car moving down the road. I'm actually not kidding. Like,
really?
There was a stray cow doing the rounds, and I don't know if it was calling a calf, but there's something about that which is so contrary.
Yeah. Amazing.
Quite healing. I have to say.
Yeah.
And I think from a creative perspective, there was an urgency to the work in Joburg and to the creativity in Joburg, which I do not think is specific to Joburg. Like we keep on talking about Joburg. I do think
but the city,
a city. I was listening to a fantastic podcast which was about creative leadership, and these are kind of industry leaders in the States, and the guy conducting the interview said, isn't it strange how we often feel in our creative fields that you are one job away from living under a bridge? And he said, and it's not necessarily, it's not true, it's not rational, but there's always this feeling of you're only as good as the last thing you put out, and you're only this far from possible potential ruin. I mean, it is exaggerated, but that's kind of that little fearful voice in the back of your mind. Because city living has its demands. It has certain cost implications, certain ways of living, so the stakes are high, and I think so. There's a fear element that's part of the driver of your creativity all of the time. Like it's measured against that. And I think coming to the countryside, two reasons. For the first time, decorating or putting together the guest house was incredibly liberating, because that in itself was a creative task. And I realized no one's going to review this work. I am not going to have anyone come to me and go, well, I don't like this style, or I don't like this color, or, it was liberating to realize I can do what I like. And if, obviously, if it appeals to a user base, that's still important. It's still a business, but there wasn't anyone else that was going to review my work where I had this fear element that was built into the creativity. And secondly, I think it was fascinating to see that there's a different way of living. Living in the countryside is far cheaper than it is living in a city. I don't travel so much. I don't commute so much. Prices are different. Yes, you compromise to a degree in terms of comfort, but I just found myself, working remotely, but the financial pressures are fewer, and your level of self-reliance is a little more, and that space between you and the bridge just became a little bigger. That you could breathe a little bit more, and the moment you can do that sort of step out of that fear space, I think it adds tremendously to the quality of the creativity, because as creativity as problem solving requires you to think laterally and look wide, and what fear does is it makes us hyper focused. It puts us in a state of survival. So the moment you're in a fear space, you look for the right answer. You don't look for the multitude of all the other possibilities that might be around. So I think stepping out of a fear space helps us think more creatively.
Yeah. Well, I think this also is the same. If I compare now what you're saying to also some musicians who talked about this, where they were in the lockdown situation, where they then suddenly realize their worth, you know, and that they suddenly then realized what they are able to do, and that it's not this competition the whole time, you know, who's there and where do I have to go, that they suddenly had this, ooh, I can breathe now for a while, you know. And I think it's almost as if you've created your own little lockdown there in the countryside, where you have your freedom, you know, and you have all these things that you can do, and then this way of keeping to your individuality, where you are decorating your guest house, for example, you know. So this is wonderful.
It's been a blessing. I do think COVID and the lockdown situation that we went through changed life. I don't think we'll ever go back to entirely to what life was before. I think it was also one can't speak about it lightly, because there was devastation that went with that. But if I could refer to this as a silver lining to a cloud, exactly. I do think there definitely is a trend of people moving to the countryside. People have been quite interested and fascinated by our move here and how we managed that. And it wasn't really us so much as that the world changed. It's my husband and I are both able to work remotely. He works for, his employers are in Australia. So we are working, you know, before lockdown, we were about to go to Sydney for a while, and the borders closed in front of our noses, and we just started doing the work from here. And now we found it's possible to actually do it from here indefinitely. So I do think there's the possibility for people to start engaging with a different kind of a lifestyle, or a hybrid lifestyle, where you are a little bit more in touch with those things that city life deprives us from. Things like just being a little bit closer to the earth, being a little bit more grounded, being a little bit closer to the food we eat, and like healthy food, good food has become incredibly important to me. I started studying biodynamics as an angle into organic farming practices for my vineyards and also for my veggies. And I think part of our our modern day epidemic in terms of issues around stress and mental health and disease is all sort of tied together also with lifestyle, stress, nutrition, you know, the way we eat, the way we, you know, it all ties into each other. And I think food and good food and enjoying being part of the process of what you eat, from planting the seeds in your back garden to harvesting in summer, or having an overabundance of tomatoes, which was a bit of a pain. You know, that's really precious. And I find that encouraging to think it's possible for more people. There's an exodus out of Joburg. It's well documented at this point. Many people are moving. People are moving to the coast. People are moving to other small towns. And that I think that's liberating to know that a different approach to life is becoming possible for us.
Yeah. And the things you're mentioning now, like planting, you know, like doing a garden, or like you doing the vineyard, there's so much that what I've been now investigating as well is how much this is actually part of art, you know, that we don't see it as that way, but you know, something as like winemaking, for example, is as much an art as it is in science. And I am trying to also talk to people to bring awareness that even on school level, that children should actually be able to do art and science and maths as their main subjects next to each other, because it's so interlinked. And what you're talking to me now about, you're a very creative person, yet you go into the science of you know, farming, because this will be part of the creativity that you have, you know, and how creatively you do this, the farming and the vineyard.
100%. And I think that comes back to what you said in the beginning, that creativity is problem solving. It's not necessarily just the creative arts. And I think the funny thing is, if we talk about creativity, we do often talk about the creative arts and we forget about the performing arts. And I mean, the performing arts to me is almost closer to science. That is, I mean, you do obviously put your emotion, your interpretation in there, but that level of skill and craft that you have to develop to me is not unlike a craftsperson or a baker or a farmer that has mastered something to such a great degree that they can perform it with such incredible ease and grace. So definitely the problem solving element of creativity, I think, lives very much in what we think of as maybe sciences, or as I said even before, I don't know, finance or whatever it is. But there is an art to it. But I found my creativity has shifted from that kind of creative arts more into that realm of doing something, learning something, and practicing and doing it the correct way, in the way that the performance arts might be, versus the expressive arts. Sorry, I mentioned the expressive arts versus the performing arts. And that I think creativity is simply an approach to something, and that to a degree, a level of lack is almost a gift, because it creates opportunity, and creativity loves a brief. How often have we felt bored? You've got a day off, and suddenly you just don't know what to do with yourself, and you find yourself doom scrolling on your phone and wasting time, and it's because you're not being creative. And other times you might find that you're under pressure, but you suddenly get a great idea and you are inspired to do something. And I think that's the difference between having a brief and not having a brief. And I think living in the countryside where everything is not just given to you on a platter or taken for granted, you have many creative briefs in a day of solving things.
Yeah, that's a wonderful way of seeing it. And I think if I think of choreographers, for example, that I spoke to over lockdown, some would say they enjoyed the quiet, they enjoyed the being alone and then creating, and others said that they wanted the people, they wanted this hustle and bustle to be able to create. So it's also this middle ground that you find, where you are and what you create. I think this is also
and it was also interesting for me, and in terms of speaking about people, the quiet times, I have enjoyed the quiet times. We've been grateful to have had an influx of many people coming to visit. So funny thing is we've seen more of our friends from out of town since we've moved here than we might have seen of them when we were back in town. So if you want your friends to come visit, have a stopover between Johannesburg and Cape Town. So that's actually been lovely. But another element that I also found interesting, and to a degree it is connected to me to creativity, is the question of identity. And it for me was twofold, in terms of meeting people in town here that I never necessarily would have rubbed shoulders with in a city context, and people whom I would never have considered befriending, or people who might have a different approach to life or an entirely different background. And that's been fascinating, to step out of kind of that bubble that I guess your routine in a city might place you in, like meeting people that are entirely out of your frame of reference or outside of your context. And that's been interesting, and to have my own ideologies tested a little bit, like you would have certain judgments about people or certain perceptions or preconceptions in a city context, and here I had to let go of those and have a more fluid interaction and interpretation with people, and sometimes realize, I'm not ideologically going to be on the same page as you, but it doesn't mean we're gonna be bad neighbors. My perceptions were stretched. And at the same time, I guess I've also gone through a space of fluidity in my own identity. I think that there were so many things that in Joburg that, I mean, I've just recently sold my house there now, and it was with a great sadness because I loved my house and I renovated my house, and a lot of my identity was in that house or in my job, or like where I went and the people that I saw and the clothes you wear and the, you know, and now after 2 years I find mostly I wear gumboots and you know, and jeans and a hat, and we don't have a hairdresser in town, so you know, certain things start from the wayside. And there isn't a fancy restaurant to go to, or you don't have it kind of levels the playing field, and you start realizing the props that you used as expressions of who you are and who you think you are.
Yeah.
So it's been interesting, but also a bit challenging to start feeling this fluidity of your identity outside of those constraints.
Yeah, because if you're used to that and if you live that, you sort of it becomes part of you, and it becomes part of what you think is normal, you know. And then very interesting. Yeah, you're touching really very interesting topics, you know, or bits there that makes me think. Yeah. But now, tell me your guest house. So the guest house is running, and you're doing that as well.
Yes, I actually have a lovely team of people that are running it for me now. I'm an extroverted introvert, so meeting strangers on a daily basis to me is really, really hard work. But I have a wonderful assistant who lives on the same road. Steffi is the superhero of our guest house, and she's an absolute people's person. So that's her passion. So she takes care of our guests. But we were lucky to have found two really lovely properties that we bought from a lady that moved on out of town, and houses that were really nicely kind of cared for, and I think she'd really done a good job in retaining their character. The one is a little National Heritage building. It dates back to 1860. It used to belong to Adam Kok. I think it was Adam Kok II, to be exact. We have a little printout of the deed and the history of the deed. So it's a small little two bedroom house that farmers in the district used to come to church once every quarter, and then they'd have a tiny townhouse to stay in. So that's the history of that. And in a slightly larger property, which is where the name comes from, the name of the business is the Dusty Vine. But there's a huge old, I think an 80-year-old vine on the patio outside, and it's such a beautiful, gnarly old tree and old trunk that I just thought that it was I wanted to bring that into the identity of the business. So hence the Dusty Vine.
But it's wonderful. So if somebody comes and visits it, they get this feeling of the environment, of where they are, and so typical of that area.
I think so, yes. So that in terms of redoing the houses, I didn't redo them. The bones were good. We just really kind of gave everything that was there a bit of a massage and a bit of an update, and making it feel a little more plush and luxurious. Philippolis is a very popular town to stay over. It's an alternative to Colesberg, so especially if people choose not to fly, it's a good halfway stop in the middle of the country, and it has a bit more character than Colesberg might have. So you really do get the feel for the area, but it's quiet. It's a quaint little street with all the small houses on it, so it's
Sounds wonderful. But now tell me just what are your wishes for the future now?
Gosh, that's a question I haven't considered for a while. I think it's a work in progress, and I've never, Thank you for asking me that question. I think it's something great for me to consider, because I think I was saying to my husband in the week that we've been here for 2 years now, and I do think that honeymoon period is over. And you really, having sold my house in Joburg, we really realize now this is it. And you start wondering, okay, well, gosh, what's it going to look like in 3 years or 5 years or so on. And I think again, it's a fluid space. Suddenly, when you're living in a city, you've got a certain idea of things you want to achieve, or like where you might be going. And here now, it's a little bit of a blank canvas. So I would love to really get better at my growing and farming practices. I think there are many non-traditional creative pursuits that I would like to get better at. I've really been falling in love with food, with cheese making, with baking, and with growing things in the air, in our back garden, my veggie patch and our vineyard. So I'd really love to get that to get into that rhythm as well. I mean, farming is hard. It's not even farming. I mean, this is hobby farming. But there's a lot to learn. So I would love to get more dexterous at that. And I think there's a beauty in having a lifestyle that's integrated with your environment. So I think that's my main aim. And I've also it's a bit of I won't say a hackneyed point, because it definitely isn't. We had someone paint the Mona Lisa with cake 2 nights ago in the name of attention to climate change. But in terms of the idea of climate change and our responsibility to the environment, it is important for me to become involved in my small way of promoting practices that are sustainable and good in terms of the produce that we make, and in terms of the way we work with the land as well as with the people on the land. I know that's quite a lofty ideal, but these are elements that have become increasingly important to me. And I have the luxury of having a piece of land where I can play a little part in that. And beyond that, also focusing on things like off-grid living. These are all things that are, I think, secondary level creative pursuits that have become more prominent in my life since moving to the countryside here, and really living a life that's rich in experience. Weeks working in marketing, which I still do. I enjoy it tremendously, but you often in a very small. I'm in a computer screen, you're very much in your head. I think I tend to live very much in my head, and for me, it's added a whole new layer of meaning and experience engaging with life outside of myself in a physical and grounded way. So I think more of that.
Well, it's wonderful, because I think if everybody has this idea of, well, I'll do something from my side, and I'll do something that is good for the environment from my side, then of course it would snowball, and it would be something really big. So I think it's always great if you do something, even if it's something small, but it's significant, that it's done.
And I think that's, if there's anything that I do feel passionate about, is about that reinterpretation of creativity into things that are slightly more practical, yet profoundly important to us. There are market gardens popping up around cities. More people are interested in kind of connecting back to the source of their livelihood. And in that, I think there's so much meaning. There's meaning making in that. There's ritual in that makes life rich for us, as well as the benefit then for our larger environment. So I'm excited about that.
Yeah, what a wonderful wish. What wonderful wishes you have. But listen, just one more thing. Can you do a shout out for a business or a coffee shop or a restaurant in your area, or where you go frequently?
I would. There is a very quaint little coffee roastery, and they are solar powered in a small town called Trompsburg, right? So it's full Trompsburg, and they are just off the N1. So they're 70 kilometers from here. They are on the N1. If you are headed down on the N1 down to Cape Town or the other way around, if you want a good coffee, do stop in. You have to drive a little bit through the town, but to get to Snob's Coffee, and they roast their own beans. And it's, as I say, it's a solar roastery. Their whole operation is solar powered, and they make fantastic light lunches and beautiful coffee. And you can buy beans and ground coffee from them as well. We sometimes, if the house gets a little bit too small for us, tight for us, we jump in the car and go work from there for a while. They've got free Wi-Fi, so you even get these things in the platteland.
You drive 70 kilometers for a coffee. That's a good one. That must be good coffee.
It's also a nice drive.
Oh, okay. It was so lovely to talk to you.
Likewise, Petra, thank you very much for the opportunity. I have no idea where you got my details, but I appreciate it. It was lovely to chat.
Okay. And continue this wonderful work that you're doing. And I hope to meet you one day in person. Please
do stop in. Check us out, the Dusty Vine.
I will.
And
definitely.
And our doors are open for you.
Thank you very much.